The Murphy family's history with Grace Church begins in May of the year 1993, when Glenn and Paula Murphy packed up their children, Marcus and Casey, and their lives and began the long journey back to South Louisiana from Youngstown, Ohio. They had been elected to the pastorate of 12 people, the First Pentecostal Church of Baker, which we now know as Grace Church. They arrived to a church building that was in shambles. The structure had recently flooded and was in a terrible state of disrepair. There was so much work to be done, and so little money with which to do it. However, Pastor Glenn Murphy had a vision of what the church could become. They rolled up their sleeves and got to work. They used the money as efficiently as they could and began getting things back in order at the building in Baker. After lots of work inside and out and a couple of years of consistent effort, the church building in Baker was restored. It became an attractive and comfortable place where the congregation could meet for worship. The people could be proud of what had been accomplished. When the Murphys arrived there were two notable families that were the backbone of the remnant: Lee Royce and Mildred Alexander, David and Cassie Crochet, and Cassie's mother, Sister Hermione Davis. Sister Davis's husband, Virgil Davis, had started the church in 1959. These families carried the burden of God's plan through some of the hardest days in the church's history. They did so with a tremendous spirit of kindness and determination. That small group of 12 began to grow quite quickly in the months following the arrival of Pastor and Sister Murphy. 3 notable families came to assist the Murphys almost immediately after their arrival. The first that came to help was the Mitchell family. Johnny and May Mitchell brought with them the gift of hospitality. They were known widely for their eagerness to host, feed, and serve the people of the church at their home, as well as at countless gatherings at the church itself. Later, the Mitchells donated a mobile home to the church, which was renovated and used for many church fellowships, as well as youth services and other related events. As you can see, when it arrived, it needed lots of work. But Pastor Murphy had a vision of what it could be. The church put its efforts into action, the vision was made real, and the church body benefited. The second family that came alongside the Murphys was the family of David and Claudine Bunch and their sons, Dave and Steve. The Bunch family brought an instant infusion of musical talent, and Claudine was a natural nurturer. For some time thereafter, she was the lone, smiling, and loving hostess that greeted churchgoers as they arrived prior to services. One other notable addition to the church, very early in the Murphys' ministry, was a young man named Kelton Nose. Kelton was full of charisma and had a heart for the art of gathering people. He was an early soul winner and succeeded in winning several of his friends and siblings to the Lord in those early years. Kelton was a key part of those early days, especially in the growing of the youth group. As the early years passed, Grace Church continued to grow, both in number and in quality. In the years following, numerous families were added to the church. Pastor and Sister Murphy preached, sang, taught, and worked diligently, all while raising a family of their own. In addition to the countless hours spent working as pastor, Brother Murphy also worked a full-time secular job as a draftsman. In 1998, the church started its first building program under the ministry of the Murphys. The mobile home that had been used as a fellowship hall could no longer meet the needs of the church, so the church commissioned the construction of a new and permanent fellowship hall to take its place. The new fellowship hall came to be known affectionately as the White House for obvious reasons. It served the church as an all-purpose facility for years to come. Youth services, teaching sessions, receptions, social events, and numerous other gatherings happened there through the years until the Baker campus was sold in 2008. Under the watchful stewardship of the Murphys, Grace Church was able to pay off the new fellowship hall in just 3 years, and in 2001, Grace was once again completely debt-free. Pastor's vision for the future continued to burn in his heart, and later in 2001, while driving along Blackwater Road in the then unincorporated area known as Central, Pastor Murphy saw a for sale sign on a piece of land. He immediately turned the car around, drove back by it, and declared to Sister Murphy, "We are going to buy this land." And they did. Grace Church obtained 19 acres of pasture land on Blackwater Road at a cost of $130,000. After just a few short years, the land was paid for, and in early 2006, the church was debt-free once again. It was at this juncture that Pastor Murphy decided that the time to build a new and larger facility had come. Grace Church had been maintaining an attendance of 60 to 70 people for a number of years, but couldn't seat many more than that in its current facility. If the church was going to grow, a step forward had to be taken. In 2006, the plan was announced. Grace Church would sell its campus in Baker and build a new building on the land on Blackwater Road, which was now located in Louisiana's newest city, Central. The city of Central had incorporated in 2005, and in doing so, had formed its own school system. The schools in the city of Central were being touted as some of the finest in the state, and that had spurred tremendous growth in the demographics of the area, as well as in the real estate market. The iron was hot, and thus it felt like it was the right time to strike. However, God had a different plan. As it often does, though, God's different plan looked and felt like defeat in that moment. Nearly 1/3 of the Grace Church congregation left in the 2 months following the announcement of the building program. Pastor and Sister Murphy felt devastated. Several major and negative events had occurred in 2006. They questioned their calling and very seriously entertained thoughts of resigning the church and giving up on ministry altogether. But God had a different plan. Pastor Murphy, after being forcefully reminded of that fact by the Spirit of God, committed himself to an extended season of prayer and seeking. He committed that beginning on the first Monday in January of 2007, he would go to the church every day and spend several hours in prayer and intercession for the future of Grace Church. This pattern of intense prayer continued for a full 2 months, and near its end, Brother Murphy saw a visible manifestation of God. This powerful and life-changing experience gave him the answer that he needed for his future in ministry, as well as for the future of Grace Church. His vision for the future was renewed, and the venerable pastor continued sowing and cultivating the seed of the gospel. As 2007 progressed, changes continued in the hearts of Pastor and Sister Murphy. While they still had battles to fight, their resolve was fueled by a renewed sense of purpose. As the summer and fall of 2007 progressed, new people once again began attending Grace Church. By 2008, the church had grown in number and was back to its full attendance levels once again. Pastor and Sister Murphy agreed that it was time to launch the building program again. This time, the idea was met with excitement and anticipation. It was accepted and agreed that Grace Church would begin construction on a brand new 7,000 square foot facility on Blackwater Road. The church would need to borrow $450,000 and combine it with the proceeds of the sale from the Baker campus in order to make that happen. The Baker campus was listed for sale with a realtor friend of Brother Murphy's named John Green. The building in Baker was sold, and Grace Church needed a place to worship while the building on Blackwater was being built. Pastor Murphy made the decision to make the move to Central immediately by asking John Green if he knew of any churches in the area that would be willing to rent their facilities to Grace on a temporary basis. John said that he did know a couple of pastors that may be open to the idea. One of those places was a church named Central Worship Center on Hooper Road. Pastor and Sister Murphy knew the facility well because they had some family that lived behind the church and because Central Worship Center was a designated voting precinct. They had voted there many times. Mr. Green floated the idea to the pastor of Central Worship Center, and he agreed to rent their building to Grace Church. In January of 2009, Pastor Murphy and his assistant, Merrill Murphy, met the pastor of Central Worship Center at the church to sign the lease agreement. The two groups spoke, exchanged stories, signed the papers, and concluded their business. As Brother Murphy was leaving the room, the pastor of Central Worship Center stopped him and said, "Brother Murphy, would you be interested in purchasing this building instead of building a new one?" Without hesitation, Brother Murphy said, "Absolutely." That response began the 14-month-long and miracle-laden process of Grace Church purchasing a well-established 17,000-square-foot campus in the very heart of the city of Central, all while borrowing less money than it would have borrowed to build the much smaller building on the outskirts of town. God had done a miracle by essentially giving Grace Church 10,000 additional square feet of building in a prime location for less money than it would have cost the church to build the new building. The Murphys gave and continue to give God the glory. The purchase of the Hooper Road building was closed in April of 2010, and immediately Grace Church, under the leadership of Pastor and Sister Murphy, went to work. The church was a tremendous blessing, but it wasn't perfect. The facilities needed improvements and repairs. Once again, the sweet, giving, and hardworking people of Grace Church answered the call and pointed their efforts in the direction of making its campus an inviting place for the community to worship in. The results of those efforts are easily visible today. Many of our community leaders have taken notice of the beautiful improvements in the property since Grace Church's acquisition of it. As a result, numerous and varied public community events have been held at the Grace Church facility. As you might expect, Grace Church has continued to grow. In the summer of 2015, construction began on the 3,500 square foot Alexander Center. It was completed in early 2016 and has served the congregation of Grace well. The building, which was named in the honor of Lee Royce and Mildred Alexander, is in constant use today. It serves as home for Sunday school classes, receptions, showers, youth services, small group activities, and various other events. Because of the vision and leadership of the Murphys, the Alexander Center is a technological mirror of the main sanctuary at Grace Church and will be used as an overflow building for services as the Grace Church congregation continues to grow. Shortly after the Alexander Center was completed, tragedy struck South Louisiana and Grace Church in the form of an epic flood. From August 11th through August 13th, 2016, over 31 inches of rain fell in the area. Experts estimated that over 140,000 structures were flooded. Grace Church was crippled for the rest of 2016 and much of 2017. 39 families, half of the church, experienced flooding in their homes. Many lost all of their household possessions. The church building itself was within fractions of an inch of taking water, but ultimately and thankfully was spared. Just like in the beginning, though, the people of Grace Church came together and helped each other and others in the community to regain their footing. Teams of people worked to clear out houses for those who didn't have help. Other teams of people worked long days in the Alexander Center preparing thousands of meals and delivering them to people who needed food in the area. Through all of that, the people of Grace Church never stopped giving to working for, and thinking of others. This is the spirit of leadership that Pastor and Sister Murphy have cultivated in their 25 years of service. Glenn Murphy was and is a man of great vision. Grace has become a vibrant and dynamic church under his consistent leadership. But possibly one of his wisest decisions was a very early one. It wasn't a decision about changing something. Rather, it was a decision about making sure that a few things didn't change. Glenn and Paula Murphy recognized when they arrived 25 years ago that while the church and its affairs were in disarray, the people who were there had some beautiful bedrock principles weaved into their character. They were kind, they were accepting, and they were generous. Glenn and Paula Murphy saw this strong foundation in those few people and chose to build the future squarely on its base. Nothing affirms this truth more than the final story that you are about to hear. After arriving in Baker in May of 1993, and while working on getting the church facility back to a state of basic functionality, the hard realities of the state of this place began to reveal themselves. While the church building was in disrepair, it didn't even come close to matching the dysfunction of the church's business affairs. Within a few weeks, the Murphys learned that the previous pastor had left the affairs of the church in a terrible condition. He had stolen money from the church itself and from its people, and left the church saddled with debts for which they had nothing to show. He had been arrested and jailed on more than one occasion. He was conducting personal business through the church office and not paying the vendors associated with those transactions. The circumstances were terrible. After being in Baker for about 3 months, the Murphys were served with documents informing them that the church was being sued by a man who the previous pastor had done business with but hadn't paid. The lawsuit demanded a payment of $110,000. A court date was set for several months later. As the date approached, Pastor and Sister Murphy knew that the church wouldn't be able to afford to pay a judgment if one was levied against it. 1 week before the trial date, the news came out that the man in question, the previous pastor, had been murdered. He left a wife and young children behind, with no system of support. The lawsuit was dropped, and Grace Church didn't have to pay restitution to the plaintiff. A short while later, the Murphys received a call from the father of the wife of the previous pastor. He indicated that a fund had been set up to help the mother and the children financially, and he asked if the church would be willing to help. Pastor Murphy was nervous about presenting the idea to the church people. After all, this man had stolen from them, misled them, and severely abused their trust. But Pastor Murphy decided to present the information to the church. Those few but strong people responded by giving an offering of thousands of dollars to that family. This is the seed of the Spirit that has been consistently cultivated over the last 25 years of Grace Church under the pastorate of Glenn and Paula Murphy. It is kind, it is generous, it is accepting, and most of all, it is redemptive to the very end. This is the foundation of Grace Church, a place of hope, healing, and restoration.